The sound of the ticking clock on the wall was the only noise that broke the silence in the room. Max, her golden retriever, had been resting his head on Sarah's lap for hours, barely moving. His fur, once thick and vibrant, now looked thin and sparse. The weight of his age and illness had taken a toll on him. Sarah's fingers gently ran through the soft strands of his coat, each stroke slower than the last, as though each moment was a precious thread unraveling before her eyes. Max had been more than just a dog. He had been her closest companion for over a decade. They had lived through every stage of her life together. When she had brought him home as a puppy, full of excitement and energy, she never imagined how deeply their bond would grow. He had been there when she moved into her first apartment, when she lost her job, and when she'd found the love of her life. Max had comforted her during sleepless nights, offering quiet companionship, and had celebrated her victories with a wagging tail and an excited bark. Now his once playful demeanor was replaced by a lethargy that Sarah couldn't ignore. She had seen the signs over the past few months: the gradual loss of energy, the refusal to play with his favorite ball, the constant naps that seemed to stretch into the hours of the day. It was a slow and painful realization, but she knew the time was coming when she would have to make the hardest decision of her life. Today, Sarah had made that decision. She had called the vet, made an appointment, and arrived, ready to face the truth. But now, as she sat there, with Max resting against her, she wasn't sure if she was ready after all. The thought of letting him go, of ending his life, felt wrong. Max had been her protector, her comfort, her friend for so many years. How could she make this decision? Max shifted slightly in her lap, his eyes barely open, but he nudged his head into her hand. It was as though he was trying to reassure her that everything would be okay, that they had lived through so much together, and now, in this moment, they would face this part of the journey side by side. His tail gave the faintest of wags, a soft reminder that his love for her remained, even in his final hours. Sarah's throat tightened as she fought back the tears. She knew this was coming, but it didn't make it any easier. She had made arrangements for the euthanasia, but the moment felt surreal. How could she prepare for something that was both so necessary and so heartbreaking? It wasn't just about saying goodbye. It was about facing the reality of life without him. In the stillness of the room, Sarah whispered to Max, her voice trembling, "I love you, Max. You've been my everything." Max's tired eyes met hers, a quiet understanding passing between them. This was it, the moment she had feared. The time had come to let him go. But just as the weight of the decision pressed down on her, Max did something she never expected. He lifted his head once more, looking up at her with what could only be described as a plea for more time. Something stirred deep inside Sarah. Was there still hope? Her heart skipped a beat. What was happening? Was Max telling her something? The drive to the vet clinic felt like an eternity. Sarah's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that her knuckles turned white. The silence in the car was deafening, broken only by the occasional sound of Max's labored breathing from the backseat. His once bright eyes were now clouded, and the small, feeble whimpers he let out were almost drowned out by the hum of the engine. Every now and then, Sarah would glance at him in the rearview mirror, her heart aching with every fleeting moment. She had known that this day would come, the day when she would have to say goodbye. But nothing could have prepared her for the overwhelming sorrow that now gripped her chest. Max had been with her through every chapter of her life, and yet, in this moment, she felt completely helpless. As the landscape outside the car window blurred by, Sarah's mind wandered back to the day she first brought Max home. He had been a tiny, scruffy ball of fur, eyes wide with curiosity. She remembered the excitement of taking him to the park for the first time, the way he would chase after tennis balls with abandon, his ears flopping in the wind. She could still hear his joyful barks, and those memories made the present feel even more unbearable. Max had been a constant presence in her life, her faithful companion through every storm, every triumph, and every failure. He had never judged her, never asked for anything more than her love and attention. He was her comfort when the world felt too big, her protector when she felt weak, and her laughter on the darkest days. The thought of losing him seemed almost impossible. A lump formed in Sarah's throat as the tears began to flow once again. She fought to keep herself composed, but the tears came anyway. How could she let go of him? How could she walk into that clinic, knowing that the next step would be the end of everything they had shared? Max shifted in the backseat, letting out another soft sigh, and Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She glanced at him again, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. He looked at her with that same tired but knowing gaze, as though he understood the pain she was feeling. He was so weak, and yet he had this quiet strength about him, as if telling her it was okay. She tried to reassure herself, telling herself that she was doing the right thing. The vet had explained that Max was suffering, that his organs were failing, and that there was nothing more that could be done. She had prepared herself for this moment, hadn't she? But even now, in the calm of the car, she couldn't escape the feeling that there was still so much more left unsaid, so many more moments to share. The clinic came into view, a small building surrounded by a lush green yard, but as Sarah turned into the parking lot, her chest tightened. The weight of the decision pressed down on her, and for a moment she hesitated. Was she truly ready to let go? Max let out a soft whimper, his body shifting slightly as though sensing her uncertainty. Sarah's gaze lingered on him for a moment longer, her heart breaking all over again. She wanted to turn the car around, to drive away with him, and find another way to make this pain stop. But as the door to the clinic opened, Sarah knew that she couldn't turn back. This was it. The moment had arrived. With one last look at Max, she unbuckled her seatbelt, gathered the strength she hadn't known she had, and opened the door. They would walk into the clinic together, just as they had walked through every other moment of their lives, side by side. The sterile, cold air of the veterinary clinic hit Sarah as soon as she walked through the door. It smelled faintly of antiseptic and was unnervingly quiet, save for the soft hum of the fluorescent lights above. She felt a pang of unease, a deep discomfort that seemed to settle into her bones as she walked through the waiting room. The silence was almost oppressive, broken only by the occasional rustle of paper or the soft murmur of other pet owners waiting with their animals. Max's body, now thin and frail, was barely resting in her arms. He had grown weaker and weaker, his once strong frame no longer able to carry the vitality it had once possessed. Sarah's heart felt heavy as she made her way to the front desk. The receptionist smiled kindly at her, but the look in Sarah's eyes must have told a different story, one of heartache and sorrow. The receptionist's smile faltered slightly, and she quietly motioned for Sarah to take a seat. As Sarah settled into the waiting area, Max's head rested gently on her lap, his breathing shallow and labored. His eyes fluttered weakly, and his body seemed to be growing heavier with each passing second. Sarah fought back more tears, stroking his fur as she whispered soft, comforting words to him, even though she knew he might not have the strength to hear them. She was trying so hard to keep it together, but everything felt wrong. The sterile smell, the quiet waiting room, the soft shuffle of feet, it was all so impersonal. She had never imagined it would feel this way. She had always imagined Max's end would come quietly, at home, in his sleep, surrounded by love. But instead, here they were, in this cold and clinical place, preparing for a goodbye she wasn't sure she was ready to face. A few minutes later, a familiar face appeared in the doorway. Dr. Evans, the vet who had cared for Max since he was a puppy. His warm smile didn't reach his eyes this time. There was a somber air about him as he walked towards Sarah. He was a kind man, always gentle with Max, and he had been there through every stage of Max's health. But today, his steps seemed heavier. "Hi, Sarah," he said softly, his voice calm but tinged with sadness. "How's he doing?" Sarah's throat tightened as she looked down at Max, whose eyes were now barely open. She struggled to speak, but the words came out in a faint whisper. "He's just so tired. I think it's time, Dr. Evans." The vet nodded, his face showing the compassion and understanding that only someone who had walked this road countless times before could offer. "I know," he said gently. "Let's take a look at him, just to make sure we're all on the same page. We'll go through everything and make sure this is the right decision." As Sarah followed Dr. Evans to the examination room, she felt a sense of dread settle in her chest. She had already made up her mind, hadn't she? She had accepted that Max's time had come. But still, that glimmer of hope inside her kept asking, what if? In the exam room, Dr. Evans examined Max with the care and attention he always gave him. He felt Max's pulse, checked his temperature, and listened closely to his heart. As he gently prodded Max's abdomen, his brow furrowed. Sarah watched closely, her heart pounding as she waited for his diagnosis. "Sarah," Dr. Evans began, his voice suddenly serious, "I'm afraid Max's condition is more advanced than I thought. His organs are failing. His heart rate is irregular, and his lungs are not functioning as they should. He's in a lot of discomfort right now." Sarah's stomach turned. She had heard all of this before. She knew what it meant. She nodded numbly, unable to form words. The tears burned at the corners of her eyes, but she held them back, unwilling to cry in front of him. But Dr. Evans continued, taking a deep breath. "There's something strange. I'm not getting the usual readings for his condition. His heartbeat, although faint, is still present. His temperature is higher than I would expect, and he's not responding in the way I would expect from a dog in his state." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. What was he saying? Was there something more going on? Sarah blinked, trying to process Dr. Evans' words. The vet's hands were still gently resting on Max's body, but his brow furrowed deeper. There was an unexpected hesitation in his demeanor, something that Sarah wasn't accustomed to seeing in the calm and collected vet. He looked down at Max, his fingers running across the dog's fur with a meticulousness that suggested he was weighing something crucial. "I'm not sure what's going on, but I want to run a few more tests before we make any decisions," Dr. Evans said slowly, looking up at Sarah. His voice was calm, but there was a palpable undercurrent of concern. "Max's condition isn't exactly typical for what we'd expect in a dog his age, and with the symptoms we've observed. It doesn't add up. I think it's worth taking a second look." Sarah's heart, already heavy with sorrow, now beat faster with a mixture of confusion and cautious hope. Could it be that Max wasn't as close to death as they had all thought? Could something have been missed? She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She was too overwhelmed, too afraid to believe it. Was there really a chance, or was this just the vet being kind? "Are you sure?" Sarah managed to whisper, her voice trembling. Her eyes never left Max's frail form, her fingers still lightly stroking his back, as if reassuring him that she wouldn't leave him, no matter what. Dr. Evans nodded. "Unsure. There are always variables, and sometimes we don't catch everything on the first pass. I'll run some quick blood tests, check his organs again, and see if there's something we've missed." Sarah took a shaky breath. In that moment, she was caught between two conflicting emotions. A part of her wanted to trust Dr. Evans, to believe that there might still be time for Max. But another part of her feared the disappointment of false hope. She had already prepared herself for the inevitable. Could she handle the possibility that Max wasn't ready to go, that he was still clinging to life despite everything? "Okay," she said finally, her voice barely audible. "Please, whatever you think is best." Dr. Evans gave her a small, understanding smile before leaving the room to prepare the tests. As he walked out, Sarah was left alone with Max. The silence was suffocating. The low hum of the clinic's fluorescent lights buzzed in her ears, making everything feel more sterile, more clinical. Yet in the stillness, she couldn't help but focus on Max's small, labored breaths. His once vibrant, golden coat seemed dull and lifeless now, his body frail and weak. But even in his exhaustion, Max's eyes remained locked onto hers, as though telling her that he wasn't ready to let go just yet. The thought struck Sarah like a bolt of lightning. Maybe, just maybe, Max hadn't been holding on because he was dying. Maybe he was waiting for something, waiting for the right moment. She looked down at him, her heart swelling with love and sadness in equal measure. How could she ever be ready for this? How could she ever say goodbye then? But as Dr. Evans returned with the blood samples and began to run the necessary tests, Sarah found herself clinging to a tiny thread of hope. What if they had been wrong? What if Max had more life to live, more moments to share with her? The question lingered in the air, unanswered, as the weight of the decision became even more excruciating. The minutes dragged on, each one feeling heavier than the last. Sarah sat in the small examination room, Max still lying quietly in her lap, his fragile form resting against her. She could feel the warmth of his body against her, but his weight seemed so much more pronounced now, a constant reminder of the journey they had been on together. Her mind raced as she stared at the door, waiting for Dr. Evans to return. Each moment stretched, feeling like an eternity. When Dr. Evans finally reappeared, his usually composed face was slightly more serious. He held a small clipboard in his hands, the papers rustling as he stepped inside. But something in his eyes, a flicker of uncertainty, stopped Sarah's breath. He had always been a professional, calm under pressure, so this unexpected shift in his demeanor gave her pause. "Sarah," he began, his voice measured and calm, "I've run the tests. The results came back different than I expected." Sarah's stomach churned as her heart leaped into her throat. The words she had been dreading were hanging in the air, suspended in silence. She had prepared herself for the worst, for confirmation that it was time to say goodbye. But now, as Dr. Evans paused, she could feel the weight of something more, something that neither of them had anticipated. Dr. Evans took a deep breath before continuing, his gaze moving back to Max. "Max's condition, it's not as we thought. It's not just old age or organ failure causing his decline. It's something else. Something that, to be honest, I didn't expect." Sarah's brow furrowed. "What do you mean? What's wrong with him?" "There's no clear sign of the organ failure we expected," Dr. Evans explained. "His kidneys and liver are functioning better than I anticipated, given the symptoms. His heart, although weak, is still beating stronger than I'd expect for a dog at this stage, and his temperature isn't quite as low as it should be in a dog who is nearing the end." Sarah's head swam with confusion. "But the tests showed." "I know," Dr. Evans cut in gently. "And that's what has me puzzled. From the symptoms we observed, it seemed like Max was suffering from terminal organ failure. But after re-examining his blood work, there's a possibility that Max isn't at the final stages we thought." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She sat up straighter, the hope she had so carefully suppressed beginning to resurface. Could it be? Could Max have been misdiagnosed? "Are you saying he's not dying?" she asked, her voice shaking, her emotions flickering between disbelief and cautious optimism. Dr. Evans hesitated for a moment, clearly weighing his next words carefully. "I'm not saying he's perfectly fine. He's certainly in a very fragile state, and his condition is serious. But I believe he could be suffering from a severe infection. His body is responding to it, but it's masked by the other symptoms. This could be treatable with the right antibiotics, but I'm not certain how much damage has been done to his organs already." Sarah's breath caught in her chest. Her mind raced as she processed what Dr. Evans was saying. An infection. A treatable infection. "So, he's not dying from old age?" she asked, almost breathless. "You think he could get better?" "There's a chance," Dr. Evans replied cautiously. "But we need to act quickly. The infection could be worsening, and his body is already weak from fighting it for so long. If we start treatment now, we might be able to stabilize him." A surge of emotion flooded through Sarah, the floodgates opening in an instant. She had been preparing herself for Max's final moments, thinking it was too late to save him. And yet, here was this tiny spark of hope, something she hadn't dared to believe in just hours ago. The tears she had been holding back began to fall freely now. She didn't know what to believe anymore. Everything she had been so certain of had just been turned upside down. Was it possible? Could Max actually recover? Could he have more time with her? "Dr. Evans, what do we do now?" Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. She was both scared and relieved, unsure of what the next steps would bring but willing to take them, knowing that she had to try. Dr. Evans gave her a reassuring look. "We'll start him on antibiotics and monitor him closely. We'll do everything we can to help him fight this infection. But it won't be easy, and it will take time. I won't make promises, Sarah, but there is a chance." And for the first time in what felt like forever, Sarah allowed herself to believe in that chance. The next few days were a blur for Sarah. After Dr. Evans' diagnosis, she could barely focus on anything other than Max. She clung to the hope that he might recover, but the uncertainty of his condition loomed over her like a heavy cloud. She had taken Max home with her, following the vet's instructions to administer the antibiotics and provide him with the care he needed. Each day felt like a fragile gift, a delicate moment where time seemed to move both too quickly and too slowly. At first, Max seemed barely responsive. He would lie in his bed, only lifting his head occasionally when Sarah called his name, but his eyes, though dull, still held that familiar spark, the one that reminded her of all the years they had spent together. His once golden fur was now matted, his body still frail, but there was a subtle shift. The infection was starting to ebb away, just as Dr. Evans had hoped. Slowly but surely, his appetite returned. At first, it was just a few bites of his favorite food, but within a couple of days, he was finishing entire meals. That tiny flicker of life, the spark that had seemed to dim, began to grow brighter. Sarah watched each change carefully, noting every small improvement. She kept him hydrated, gave him his medicine religiously, and made sure to keep his environment quiet and calm, allowing him to rest as much as he needed. The nights were still hard. Max was restless at times, whimpering softly as if the pain and discomfort still lingered. But even in his weakest moments, he seemed to reach out for her, pressing his nose against her hand or curling up closer to her side. One morning, just a few days after beginning the treatment, Sarah woke to the sound of Max's tail gently thumping against the floor. At first, she thought it was a dream, but when she opened her eyes, she saw him standing at the foot of the bed, his head cocked slightly to the side, looking at her with a quiet intensity. She blinked, disbelief washing over her. "Max," she whispered, hardly daring to hope. "Is that you?" The golden retriever's tail wagged again, a little slower than usual, but still a wag, his first real sign of joy in what seemed like forever. Sarah's heart swelled as she watched him, her eyes filling with tears. Was it possible? Was he truly improving? She cautiously sat up in bed, reaching out to him. "Come here, buddy," she coaxed softly, and to her surprise, Max took a few slow steps toward her, his legs unsteady but determined. He was still weak, but the mere act of moving felt like a victory. She bent down, her hands trembling as she stroked his head. "You're back," she murmured, overwhelmed with emotion. Max let out a soft whimper, nuzzling into her, seeking comfort in her touch. It was as if he, too, had been waiting for this moment. Sarah could feel the warmth of his body against hers, and for the first time in what felt like so long, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was still hope. He wasn't gone. Not yet. Over the next few days, Max's progress continued, albeit slowly. He was still far from the vibrant dog he once was, but the changes were undeniable. His appetite grew stronger, his tail wagged more frequently, and even his once dull eyes seemed to brighten with every passing day. Sarah found herself smiling more, the weight of impending loss lifting little by little as she watched him fight, as he always had. But she knew it wasn't a guarantee. There were no promises. The road to recovery would still be long, and Max's body was still fragile. The infection might have been tamed, but there were no certainties in the world of health. Only hope and the relentless determination to keep fighting. And as Sarah spent each day with him, tending to his needs and watching his steady recovery, she realized that this was not just a battle for Max's life. It was a reminder of the strength they both possessed. She had feared losing him, but now she was reminded that sometimes, even in the darkest moments, hope could rise from the most unexpected places. It wasn't over yet, not for Max, not for them. As the days passed, Sarah allowed herself to relax just a little. Max's recovery, though gradual, was undeniably promising. His appetite had returned, his energy was improving, and even his once labored breathing had started to normalize. He still wasn't running through the house like he used to, but there were signs of life in him that Sarah had almost given up on seeing again. Each small victory, Max standing on his own, Max wagging his tail more fervently, felt like a triumph, and Sarah couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude for the time they still had together. She spent her mornings sitting beside him, watching him slowly regain his strength, and every evening she'd sit by his side, offering gentle encouragement, whispering sweet words that he could barely understand but could feel. However, despite the steady progress, something inside Sarah remained on edge. There was an unease that she couldn't shake. She knew Max wasn't completely out of the woods yet. She had seen enough of the world of veterinary medicine to know that recovery, especially in a dog his age and condition, was never a straight path. The infection may have been under control, but she couldn't ignore the nagging worry that something else could go wrong, that this newfound hope might be fleeting. One afternoon, about a week after Max had begun showing signs of improvement, Sarah was sitting on the couch with him nestled beside her. The sun streamed in through the window, casting a warm, golden glow on the room. Max's eyes were closed, his breathing slow and steady. He seemed content, a quiet moment of peace after the chaos of the past week. But as she stroked his fur, Sarah felt something shift in him. His body stiffened for a moment, and he let out a faint whimper, a soft, almost imperceptible sound, but it caught Sarah's attention immediately. Her hand froze mid-motion. "Max," she whispered, leaning in to gently check his face. His eyes were still closed, but his body had gone tense, and his breathing, which had been steady and deep, seemed to falter. She watched him carefully, her heart pounding in her chest. For a moment, she thought she was imagining things, that maybe she had overreacted, but then Max's body tensed again, and he let out another low whine, his nose twitching. Something wasn't right. "Max," Sarah murmured again, a sense of dread creeping in. She quickly stood, her hand hovering over him, unsure of what to do next. She'd seen this behavior before in other dogs, but she wasn't sure if it was just a passing discomfort or if something more serious had returned. Max struggled to lift his head, but his eyes remained unfocused, as if he were trying to stay conscious but couldn't quite manage. The sight of him in such a state, a far cry from the dog who had been showing so much promise only a day before, sent a cold wave of panic through Sarah's body. This wasn't like the earlier days when his recovery had seemed so certain. This felt different. Her mind raced as she considered what to do next. She had to get him to the vet immediately, no matter what. The relief she had been feeling over the past week seemed to be slipping away as quickly as it had come, replaced by a cold uncertainty. She quickly grabbed her phone and dialed Dr. Evans, her hands trembling as the phone rang. "Please, please be okay," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible as she looked at Max, who was now visibly struggling to breathe. Not like this. Not after everything. She didn't know what was happening to him, but one thing was certain, this wasn't over. Max was still fighting, and Sarah wasn't ready to let go. Not now, not yet. The drive to the vet felt like an eternity. Sarah's heart raced, her mind flooded with a dozen worst-case scenarios. Max's labored breathing was almost unbearable to hear, each shallow gasp a reminder of how fragile his condition still was. She kept her hand on his soft head, trying to offer him comfort, though the trembling in her fingers betrayed her own fear. The once steady improvements now seemed fragile, teetering on the edge of a precipice she couldn't see. When they arrived at the clinic, Sarah rushed Max into Dr. Evans' office, her heart pounding in her chest. Dr. Evans, who had grown so familiar with Max over the years, looked up in concern as he saw the state Max was in. He immediately took action, leading them into an examination room. The sound of the clinic's door swinging closed behind them was sharp and unsettling in the quiet, sterile environment. Max, barely able to stand on his own, was placed gently on the table. Sarah stood beside him, her eyes fixed on the vet as he quickly ran some preliminary checks. He ran a stethoscope over Max's chest, listening carefully. The dog's heart rate was erratic, and his breathing was still uneven. Dr. Evans looked up, his face shadowed with concern. "Sarah," he began gently, his voice soft but firm, "Max is struggling. His infection had been under control, but now I'm seeing signs that his body is rejecting the treatment. His organs are beginning to shut down more rapidly. His heart and lungs are failing, and I'm afraid he's in a lot of pain." Sarah's stomach twisted into knots, the words piercing her like a dagger. She had been bracing herself for this moment, but the reality of it felt like a blow she wasn't prepared for. Her voice cracked as she spoke. "So, is there nothing more we can do?" Dr. Evans hesitated for a moment, his eyes searching hers. "I can try to stabilize him with fluids and pain management, but his condition is deteriorating quickly. If we don't make a decision soon, he could suffer more, and I don't want that for him. He's in a lot of discomfort." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she looked down at Max. The dog's head rested on her lap, his once bright eyes now dull and glassy. The weight of the decision pressed down on her chest like a crushing force. She had never imagined this would be the moment she would face, having to decide whether to let go of the animal who had been her companion for so many years, who had been there through every high and every low. "Max, I love you so much," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't want you to suffer anymore, but I don't know if I can say goodbye." Dr. Evans placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, his voice soft with understanding. "It's never easy, Sarah, but sometimes the most loving thing we can do is to let them go peacefully. If you choose, we can help him pass with dignity, without pain. We can give him that peace." For what felt like an eternity, Sarah remained silent, her fingers brushing through Max's fur. Every part of her screamed to hold on, to fight, to search for some miracle. But as she looked at Max's tired, pained eyes, she knew the truth. He had fought so hard, but now it was time for him to rest. He had been there for her through so much, and she owed it to him to let him go, to end his suffering. "I'm ready," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Let's give him peace." Dr. Evans nodded solemnly and stepped away to prepare for the procedure. Sarah stayed with Max, her heart heavy with grief, but also with a profound sense of love. She whispered to him, telling him how much he meant to her, how much she would always love him. Max's breathing slowed, and as the gentle sedatives took effect, his body relaxed for the first time in what felt like days. When the moment came, Sarah held him close, feeling his warmth and the weight of his small body against hers. She could still feel his heartbeat, faint but steady. And as the final injection was given, Max's breathing slowed one last time. With a soft sigh, his body went limp in her arms, and the light left his eyes. Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she held him, but she knew she had given him the greatest gift she could: freedom from pain and peace. Max was gone, but the love they had shared would live on forever in her heart. And as she said her final goodbye, Sarah promised herself that she would never forget the loyal companion who had walked beside her through every step of life. He had given her so much, and now it was time for him to rest.